Have you ever thought you had everything under control, only to have life pull the rug out from under you? I am Michelle, a successful lawyer, until a fatal car accident changed my life in an instant. On October 12, 2024, I was clinically dead for 8 minutes. But instead of darkness, I found myself face to face with Jesus, who revealed what fasting truly means, and it was nothing like you and I had ever imagined. This is my NDE, and it's a story of transformation you won't want to miss. But before we start, please let me know where you're listening from. It will be nice to feel closer, even if we're physically apart. Also, don't forget to like and comment on what you thought about this near-death experience testimony. Let's have a fair and open discussion so we can learn from each other on this channel. Enjoy listening. It happened so suddenly. Atlanta's early autumn air was crisp, the city awakening to another day of bustling activity. I was driving to an important client presentation, my mind racing with strategies and potential pitch angles. My Mercedes S-Class cut through the morning traffic with precision, but without my anticipation, the intersection came up quickly, too quickly. The last thing I remember was the blinding flash of a semi-truck's headlights and the screeching of tires. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in a hospital. I was surrounded by an indescribable light, so pure and intense that it seemed to penetrate every fiber of my being. And there, standing before me, was Jesus. His presence was unlike anything I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a visual manifestation. It was a complete sensory and spiritual experience. His eyes held a depth of understanding that made every achievement of my previous life seem utterly inconsequential. "Michelle," he said, "we need to discuss something important. Fasting." Fasting? The word itself seemed so simple, so ancient. In my previous life, it was something I associated with extreme religious practices or diet trends. I had never seriously considered it as a meaningful spiritual exercise. Jesus began to unfold the intricate spiritual landscape of fasting, revealing truths that would fundamentally challenge everything I thought I knew about spiritual practices. Humans have monumentally misunderstood fasting, he explained. It's not a diet. It's not a performance. It's a sophisticated spiritual technology designed to recalibrate your entire spiritual ecosystem. He proceeded to reveal the two most shocking mistakes believers consistently make when approaching fasting, revelations so profound they would completely transform how spiritual disciplines are understood. Jesus showed me vision after vision of individuals who transformed fasting into a spiritual performance. These were people who would announce their fasts on social media, who would dramatically talk about their hunger, who would ensure everyone knew about their supposed spiritual dedication. The visions were devastating. I saw countless spiritual opportunities squandered because individuals were more concerned about appearing holy than actually connecting with the divine. The second revelation was even more groundbreaking. Jesus explained that fasting without a clear, specific spiritual intention was essentially spiritual malpractice. Then he carefully explained the different types of fasts, each with its own spiritual significance. First, there's the absolute fast, which involves completely giving up food and water. It's rare and intense, usually done in times of serious spiritual crisis or when urgent intercession is needed. Then there's the normal fast, where you abstain from solid foods but can still drink liquids. This is the most common type in the Bible, often used when seeking divine direction or a spiritual breakthrough. Next up is the partial fast, where you eliminate certain foods or food groups, like Daniel did with his veggie and water-only diet. It's all about intentionality and discipline. The John Wesley fast involves eating only bread and drinking water, usually for spiritual preparation or seeking empowerment. Finally, the rotation fast, though mostly used for medical reasons, also carries spiritual principles about systematic elimination and discernment. Jesus kept stressing how important it is to put these fasts into practice. Start small. Be consistent. Be humble. Don't turn it into some kind of performance. Make it a real heart pursuit. As our conversation continued, Jesus emphasized the importance of practical implementation. Start small. Be consistent. Be humble. Don't make it a performance. Make it a genuine heart pursuit. Jesus began to delve deeper into the historical and spiritual significance of fasting, transforming my understanding from a mere religious practice to a profound spiritual discipline. Look at the biblical examples, he said, and suddenly, I was witnessing historical scenes unfolding before my eyes. I saw Ezra, leading 4,000 people in a collective fast, their bodies bent in humble supplication. The scene was raw, powerful, an entire community seeking divine intervention through unified spiritual discipline. Ezra's fast wasn't about individual glory, but about collective spiritual breakthrough. Then came the vision of Esther, her courage radiating through a community-wide fast. The Jewish people united in prayer and abstinence, their collective spiritual energy creating a supernatural protective force. It wasn't just about not eating, it was about creating a spiritual atmosphere of intervention and protection. Fasting is never just about the individual, Jesus explained. It's about alignment. Alignment with divine purpose, with community, with a higher spiritual reality. He showed me the nuanced layers of fasting in different biblical contexts. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, wasn't just a religious ritual. It was a profound moment of national spiritual recalibration. Every person, from the highest priest to the simplest citizen, would abstain from food, symbolically afflicting their souls, remembering their need for divine mercy and forgiveness. Most people misunderstand spiritual disciplines, Jesus continued. They see fasting as a form of punishment or a spiritual diet. But it's actually a sophisticated communication technology between the human spirit and the divine realm. The revelations were becoming increasingly complex. Jesus began to explain the physiological and spiritual interconnections of fasting. When we deliberately create space by abstaining from food, we're not just experiencing physical hunger. We're creating a spiritual receptivity, a heightened sensitivity to divine communication. Your body is more than just a physical engine, he said. It's an intricate spiritual instrument. When you fast with intention, you're essentially tuning that instrument, creating clear spiritual reception. He walked me through the different approaches to fasting, each with its own spiritual depth and meaning. The absolute fast, for example, is rare and incredibly intense. It involves complete abstinence from both food and water. Paul's 3-day fast after his encounter on the road to Damascus wasn't just a physical test, it was a complete spiritual reset. This kind of fast is often done in moments of deep spiritual crisis or when urgent intercession is needed, symbolizing total surrender. Then there's the normal fast, which is the most common type mentioned in the Bible. It involves abstaining from solid foods while still drinking liquids. It's not about punishing the body but about creating space for spiritual focus. Even Jesus practiced this during his 40 days in the wilderness, using the time as a period of intense preparation and divine connection. The partial fast is a bit more flexible but no less significant. It's like Daniel's diet of vegetables and water, a choice rooted in spiritual discipline. For Daniel, refusing the king's rich food wasn't just about health, it was a bold stand for spiritual integrity and a way of staying aligned with his faith despite the cultural pressures around him. Then there's the John Wesley fast, which involves eating only bread and drinking water. For Wesley, this wasn't about deprivation but about preparation. Before key spiritual gatherings, he would fast to sharpen his spiritual sensitivity, trusting that physical discipline could unlock deeper spiritual power. Lastly, there's the rotation fast. While primarily used for medical purposes, it carries a spiritual lesson about discernment and understanding what truly nourishes versus what might hinder. As Jesus spoke, I realized that fasting is so much more than a religious tradition. It's a deeply intentional spiritual practice, a way to realign ourselves with the divine and create a stronger connection to God's will. It's not just about what we give up, but about what we gain in spiritual clarity and purpose. The most critical element of fasting, he explained, is your heart's intention. Suddenly, the visions around me shifted. I saw multiple scenarios of fasting, some powerful and transformative, others completely ineffective. The difference wasn't in the method, but in the spiritual posture of the person fasting. A young missionary in a remote African village fasted with such pure intention that I could see spiritual atmospheres shifting around her. Her fast wasn't about personal achievement or public recognition. It was a genuine cry for divine intervention in her community. Contrast that with another scene, a prominent church leader announcing his fast on social media, carefully curating his spiritual performance. Despite following all the technical rules of fasting, there was a spiritual emptiness, a profound lack of genuine connection. "Your first mistake," Jesus said, his voice carrying both gentle correction and profound wisdom, "is turning fasting into a performance." He quoted his own words from Matthew 6 verses 16 to 18, the scripture now alive and breathing with supernatural revelation. "When you fast, do not look somber like the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full." The spiritual mechanics of this principle became crystal clear. Every time someone fasts to be seen by others, they're essentially trading a potential supernatural breakthrough for temporary human applause. The moment the fast becomes about public recognition, its spiritual potency is completely nullified. "Your second critical mistake," he continued, "is fasting without purposeful intention." This revelation was even more groundbreaking. Fasting wasn't just about avoiding food. It was a strategic spiritual intervention, a deliberate method of creating sacred space, of positioning oneself to receive divine guidance, of aligning human will with heavenly purposes. Jesus began to thoughtfully explain the deeper spiritual principles behind intentional fasting, breaking it down step by step. First, he talked about spiritual alignment. Fasting, he said, opens up a unique connection with the spiritual realm. By temporarily stepping away from physical sustenance, you're showing a deeper hunger for something greater, spiritual nourishment. Next, he described intentional margin. In a world that's constantly loud and filled with distractions, fasting creates space for quiet. It's like clearing out the static so you can hear God's voice more clearly. Then there was the discipline of surrender. Every pang of physical discomfort during a fast is a reminder, a chance to let go of human desires and align yourself with God's will. It's about learning to prioritize the eternal over the temporary. Finally, he shared the idea of communal spiritual power. When people come together in fasting, there's a kind of spiritual synergy that happens. It's not just individual growth, it's a collective multiplication of spiritual energy and power. The more he explained, the more I realized this wasn't just about fasting. Jesus was laying out an entire spiritual framework, a way of living that could transform the way we connect with God and with each other. Most believers approach fasting like a spiritual diet, he said, a hint of divine humor in his voice. But it's actually a powerful realignment mechanism for your entire spiritual infrastructure. He emphasized the practical implementation. Start small. Be consistent. Be humble. Don't make it a performance. Make it a genuine heart pursuit. Your first fast doesn't need to be a marathon, he counseled. Start with skipping a meal. Use that time for focused prayer. Be intentional. Be present. The revelations were so profound, so transformative, that they challenged every preconceived notion I had about spiritual disciplines. This wasn't just information, this was a complete spiritual recalibration. Jesus then began to address the practical challenges of fasting, the very human struggles that often prevent people from experiencing its transformative power. Most people are afraid of fasting, he explained. They're conditioned by a world that constantly tells them to satisfy every physical craving immediately. The visions around me shifted, showing the internal battles people face when considering fasting. I saw the intricate dance between physical desire and spiritual discipline, the moment when hunger pangs rise, when the body protests, when the mind begins to negotiate. Fasting isn't about punishment, Jesus emphasized. It's about creating spiritual space. It's about repositioning your priorities. He walked me through the physiological and spiritual dynamics of fasting. When we deliberately create space by abstaining from food, we're doing more than just experiencing physical hunger. We're creating a heightened spiritual receptivity, a more sensitive spiritual antenna. The conversation became intensely personal. Jesus began to address the specific challenges I would face in implementing these spiritual principles. For someone like you, Michelle, he said, looking directly into my soul, fasting will be particularly challenging. You've built an entire life around control, around immediate gratification, around proving your worth through constant achievement. The observation was devastatingly accurate. My entire legal career had been built on the premise of immediate action, of constant productivity. The thought of voluntarily setting aside physical sustenance seemed counterintuitive to everything I'd been taught. Jesus revealed the deeper spiritual principle. True spiritual strength isn't about constant doing, but about strategic pausing. Fasting teaches you that your worth isn't in your productivity, he explained. Your worth is in your relationship with the divine. It's about learning to be, not just to do. He started laying out practical steps for fasting, fully understanding the challenges people face when trying to embrace it. First, he said, start small. Don't dive into a week-long fast if you've never fasted before. Begin with something simple, like skipping a single meal, and use that time to focus on spiritual connection. Next, have a clear purpose. Fasting without direction can feel empty. Whether you're seeking guidance, interceding for someone, or pursuing a personal breakthrough, make sure you know why you're fasting. It gives the experience meaning and focus. Then, create accountability. Find someone who understands the journey, a spiritual partner who can encourage you, pray with you, and keep you grounded throughout the process. He also emphasized the importance of replacing physical hunger with spiritual hunger. The time you'd normally spend eating could instead be used for prayer, meditation, or diving into spiritual readings. It's about redirecting your energy toward God. Finally, he reminded me to be gentle with yourself. Fasting isn't about being perfect or meeting some rigid standard. It's about showing up with an intentional heart and pursuing a deeper connection with the divine. Hearing these steps made fasting feel less intimidating and more like a practical tool for spiritual growth. The revelations were becoming increasingly nuanced. Jesus wasn't presenting fasting as a religious obligation, but as a sophisticated spiritual technology for personal transformation. Fasting is a conversation, he said. A dialogue between your human limitation and divine possibility. I saw visions of individuals who had transformed their lives through intentional fasting. Not just religious practitioners, but entrepreneurs, artists, leaders who had discovered a deeper spiritual dimension through this practice. One vision particularly struck me, a tech entrepreneur who had implemented monthly fasting as a form of spiritual and creative reset. During these periods, he would disconnect from digital noise, create space for reflection, and experience unprecedented creative breakthroughs. Your culture teaches constant consumption, Jesus explained. Fasting is about strategic subtraction. It's about creating margin, creating space for divine intervention. Then Jesus began to reveal the deeper spiritual mechanics of fasting, how it operates beyond mere physical abstinence, touching the very core of human spiritual potential. Fasting is a language, he explained. A form of spiritual communication that transcends words. The visions around me became increasingly complex. I saw generations of spiritual practitioners, from ancient prophets to modern-day intercessors, using fasting as a sophisticated spiritual instrument. It wasn't just about not eating, it was about creating a unique frequency of spiritual communication. Jesus revealed the intricate connection between physical discipline and spiritual breakthrough. Each moment of hunger became a prayer, each physical discomfort a channel of spiritual transformation. Fasting wasn't punishment, it was a deliberate recalibration of the human spirit. Your body is more than a physical machine, he said. It's a spiritual antenna. When you fast with intentionality, you're essentially tuning that antenna to receive divine frequencies. The revelations became deeply personal. Jesus began to show me the specific spiritual blockages in my own life, the professional achievements that had become barriers to genuine spiritual connection, the constant drive for success that had prevented me from experiencing true spiritual depth. Your greatest spiritual breakthrough, he whispered, will come not through achievement, but through surrender. As the vision began to slowly fade, Jesus' final instructions became crystal clear. Fasting wasn't about perfection. It was about intentional pursuit. It was about creating space for divine intervention. Slowly, I felt myself being pulled back to physical consciousness. The luminous environment began to dissolve, Jesus' presence gently withdrawing. His final words echoed with profound clarity. Fasting is a heart journey, not a religious performance. I gasped, my eyes opening in a sterile hospital room. Doctors surrounded me, discussing my miraculous survival after being clinically dead for 8 minutes following a catastrophic car accident. But I knew the truth. Those 8 minutes had been the most spiritually educational moments of my entire existence. In the months that followed, I began implementing what Jesus had revealed. I didn't make announcements, and I didn't seek recognition. I simply sought a deeper, more intentional spiritual connection. My life transformed. The relentless corporate drive was replaced by a profound sense of spiritual purpose. Fasting became not a religious obligation, but a sacred dialogue with the divine. To those watching, I offer this challenge. Start small. Be intentional. Create space to hear divine guidance. Your spiritual breakthrough awaits.